I'm Master Sergeant Hastings, and I clawed my way from double shifts and night school to a career built on quiet competence and results. For years, I bankrolled and buffered my younger sister's life. But when her husband mocked my rank at their anniversary dinner, and she laughed, I made a choice that changed everything. Ever been belittled by someone you poured yourself into? Tell me in the comments, you're not alone. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit like and subscribe for more straight-up stories about boundaries and worth. What happened next might surprise you. I felt nothing at all. The first month of Marcus's deployment passed quietly. Sarah called twice, both times brief conversations where she updated me on his arrival, his assignment to a forward operating base, his initial letters describing the heat and dust and long days. She seemed to be waiting for me to ask follow-up questions or express concern, but I offered only minimal responses. He says the work is harder than he expected, she said during the second call. More dangerous too. They're doing daily patrols, convoy escorts. He thinks he might extend his deployment to get more experience. That's ambitious of him. I wish he'd just focus on coming home safe. He's doing what he thinks is best for his career. Isn't that what you both wanted? There was silence on her end, then a small sigh. I guess. It just feels different when he's actually gone. By the third month, Sarah's calls had stopped entirely. I heard updates through family. Mom mentioned that Sarah seemed stressed, that Marcus's letters were coming less frequently, that the deployment was harder than either of them had anticipated. I didn't reach out. For the first time in our relationship, Sarah's problems were hers to solve alone. My own life, meanwhile, had found a new rhythm. Without the constant background worry about Sarah's needs and crises, I discovered I had more energy for my own pursuits. I took evening classes in leadership development, started a fitness routine that actually stuck, spent weekends exploring places I'd never had time to visit. Colonel Peterson recommended me for a special assignment working with junior enlisted personnel on career development. The work was rewarding, helping young soldiers navigate the same challenges I'd once faced alone. Several of them reminded me of who I'd been at their age: dedicated, hardworking, but unsure how to advocate for themselves in a system that often overlooked quiet competence. You have a gift for this, Colonel Peterson told me after observing one of my mentoring sessions. These kids trust you because they can see you've been where they are. It felt good to be valued for skills I developed through experience rather than connections. Good to know that my years of service meant something tangible to people who needed guidance. For months into Marcus's deployment, I ran into Sarah at the commissary. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, with the strained expression of someone carrying too much worry alone. "I've been meaning to call you," she said, her voice uncertain. Things have been difficult. I imagine deployment is an adjustment. It's not just the deployment. Marcus is different in his letters. Distant. Like the stress is changing him. She paused, studying my face for some sign of the sympathy she'd once taken for granted. And I realized I don't really know how to do this without support. There it was. The admission I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Sarah, who'd laughed when her husband called me a deadbeat, now admitting she needed the kind of support I'd always provided. You could join a spouse support group. Most bases have them. I've tried. It's not the same as family. Her voice cracked slightly. I keep thinking about how you used to help me through everything. How you always knew what to do. That was a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago. Last year you would have called to check on me. You would have visited, helped me figure out how to handle things. She was right, of course. Last year I would have dropped everything to support her through deployment anxiety. I would have made it my problem to solve, my responsibility to manage. People change, Sarah. She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to recognize someone she'd once known. You're angry with me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, I'm not angry. Then what is it? Why do you feel like a stranger? I could have told her about the anniversary dinner, about watching her laugh while Marcus insulted me. Could have explained how 20 years of one-way devotion had finally reached its limit. Could have given her the fight she seemed to be asking for, the dramatic confrontation that might have cleared the air or ended things completely. Instead, I just shrugged. Maybe I'm tired of always being the one who calls first. It was a mild response, almost gentle, but it hit her like a physical blow. She stepped back slightly, her face shifting through confusion, hurt, and something that might have been recognition. I never thought. I didn't realize. She trailed off, perhaps finally understanding that relationships required effort from both sides. Take care of yourself, Sarah, I said, and continued shopping. I watched her in my peripheral vision as I moved through the aisles. She stood frozen in the cereal section for several minutes, as if trying to process what had just happened. When I reached checkout, she was gone. That encounter marked a shift in my perspective. Seeing Sarah struggle with deployment, watching her finally grasp that she'd taken my support for granted, should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt empty. Not vindictive pleasure, just nothing. I'd expected revenge to feel different. More dramatic, more emotionally charged. But this wasn't revenge in any traditional sense. I hadn't actively hurt Sarah or Marcus. I'd simply stopped cushioning their lives with my constant availability. Marcus had wanted combat experience, and I'd helped him get it. Sarah had wanted to be independent of her enlisted sister's influence, and now she was. Everyone was getting exactly what they'd asked for. The 6th month brought news that Marcus's unit had been involved in several serious firefights. No casualties in his immediate group, but the letters home had become sporadic and tense. Sarah called Mom daily now, seeking reassurance and support she'd once gotten from me. Mom mentioned it during one of our weekly calls. Your sister is having a hard time with the deployment. She asks about you sometimes, whether you're angry with her. What do you tell her? That you're busy with your own life. That maybe she should call you herself if she wants to know how you're doing. And does she? No. I think she's afraid of what you might say. Or afraid of what I might not say. The old me would have reassured Sarah that everything was fine, that Marcus would come home safely, that she was stronger than she knew. The current me offered no such guarantees. Month 7 brought the first real crisis. Marcus's convoy hit an improvised explosive device during a routine patrol. No one was killed, but 2 soldiers were injured, and the psychological impact rattled the entire unit. Marcus's next letter mentioned sleepless nights, increased paranoia, and the growing realization that his deployment might extend beyond the original timeline. Sarah called me that night, crying. I answered, which surprised us both. Did you hear about Marcus's convoy? Mom mentioned it. He could have been killed. 2 soldiers in the truck behind him went to the hospital. He says the sound keeps replaying in his head. I listened to her describe her fears, her sleepless nights, her growing conviction that something terrible was going to happen. The old me would have offered comfort, distraction, practical solutions. The current me just listened. I don't know how to help him from here, she said finally. He needs support, but I feel useless. Like I'm failing him when he needs me most. That's hard. Is that all you're going to say? What would you like me to say? Something. Anything. You used to know how to make things better. I used to try to make things better. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time. I think I understand now. Why you're different. I hurt you somehow and you're punishing me. The word punishing hung in the air between us. It implied intentional cruelty, calculated payback, active malice. But that wasn't what this was. This was just absence. The absence of automatic support, unconditional availability, one-way devotion. I'm not punishing you, Sarah. I'm just not rescuing you anymore. What's the difference? The difference is that I didn't wish Marcus dead. I only wished him gone. The words came out before I could stop them, colder and more honest than I'd intended. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told me she understood the implication immediately. What do you mean by that? But I'd said too much already. I need to go. Take care of yourself. I hung up before she could respond, before she could ask the questions that might lead to answers neither of us wanted to hear. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud, even to yourself. Especially to yourself. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 8 months into Marcus's deployment. I was reviewing training schedules when my phone rang with Sarah's number. I let it go to voicemail, as had become my habit. But she called back immediately. Then again. By the 4th call, I knew something had happened. I answered on the 5th ring. What's wrong? Marcus is dead. Her voice was flat, empty of everything except the basic function of forming words. Roadside bomb. His convoy. Yesterday morning their time. I sat down at my desk, staring at the training schedules that had seemed important moments before. Sarah, I'm sorry. Are you? The question came out sharp, cutting. Are you really sorry? I opened my mouth to offer conventional condolences, the kind of comfort I'd once provided automatically. But the words wouldn't come. Was I sorry? Sorry that a young officer had died serving his country? Yes. Sorry that my sister was now a widow? Yes. Sorry that Marcus specifically was dead? That was more complicated. I'm sorry you're in pain, I said finally. But not sorry he's gone. The silence stretched between us, filled with an accusation I couldn't deny because it was true. I wasn't sorry Marcus was gone. I was sorry he was dead. Death was too final, too permanent, too much, but I wasn't sorry he was no longer in Sarah's life, no longer there to diminish her connection to me. The funeral is Thursday, Sarah continued when I didn't respond. Full military honors. The whole ceremony. Do you need help with arrangements? I need my sister. Her voice broke on the last word. I need someone who cares about me more than they hate him. I never hated Marcus. No, you just wanted him gone. You got your wish. The words hit like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. I had wanted him gone. Not dead, never dead, but gone from Sarah's life, gone from the dynamic that had turned my sister into a stranger. And now he was gone, more permanently than I'd ever imagined. Sarah, I know it was you. Her voice was stronger now, carrying a certainty that chilled me. The deployment. Someone recommended him specifically for that assignment. Someone who knew he wanted combat experience. My throat felt tight. A lot of people knew that. But only one person had reason to want him sent away. Only one person he'd insulted badly enough to want revenge. The word hung between us again, revenge. But this time it carried weight, consequence, the knowledge that actions had led to results neither of us had fully anticipated. You think I got your husband killed? I think you got him sent to the place where he died. I think you used your military connections to make sure he got the dangerous assignment he was too proud to refuse. She paused, and when she spoke again her voice was cold as winter. I think you killed him without pulling a trigger. I could have denied it. Could have pointed out that Marcus had wanted deployment, had bragged about officers who served in combat, had volunteered for exactly the kind of assignment he'd received. Could have explained that military deployments were complex processes involving multiple decision-makers and that no single person could manipulate the system so completely. All of that would have been true. But it wouldn't have been the whole truth. He called me a deadbeat, I said quietly. At your anniversary dinner. Called me a military deadbeat, and you laughed. So you had him killed. So I helped him get what he said he wanted. Combat experience. A real deployment. The chance to prove he was a better soldier than his deadbeat sister-in-law. And now he's dead. Yes, now he's dead. We sat in silence, the weight of that reality settling between us. Marcus was dead, killed by an enemy bomb in a war zone he'd specifically requested to serve in. Sarah was a widow at 31. And I was the sister who'd helped make it all possible. I'll never forgive you for this, Sarah said finally. I know. I never want to see you again. I know. If you come to the funeral, I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll make sure they know who's really responsible. The threat should have scared me, but it didn't. Let people know. Let them judge whether helping someone get what they'd asked for was the same as murder. Let them decide if 20 years of devotion followed by one night of humiliation justified the consequences that had followed. I won't come to the funeral, I said. Good. Her voice was quiet now, exhausted. Good. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, staring at training schedules and thinking about the difference between intention and outcome, between wishing someone gone and getting them killed. Outside my window, soldiers were conducting PT, their voices carrying the rhythm of cadence calls across the base. Normal military life continuing while somewhere across the country, my sister was planning her husband's funeral. I didn't feel guilty exactly. But I didn't feel vindicated either. I felt empty, like something essential had been carved out and left me hollow. The satisfaction I'd imagined finding in Marcus's absence was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was just the knowledge that I'd gotten exactly what I'd wanted, and it had cost more than I'd been prepared to pay. That night I composed 3 different letters to Sarah. Apologies, explanations, attempts to bridge the gap between intention and outcome. I threw them all away. Some distances were too great to cross. Some truths were too dangerous to speak. Some prices were too high to have been worth paying, but too final to undo. The months that followed Marcus's death passed in a strange suspension of time. I went to work, completed assignments, mentored junior soldiers, attended briefings. The external rhythms of military life continued unchanged, but everything felt muted, as if I was experiencing my own life through thick glass. Sarah kept her word about not wanting contact. No calls, no texts, no communication through family members. Mom mentioned her occasionally, that she was struggling with widow benefits, that she'd moved back to their hometown, that she was seeing a therapist, but never asked me to reach out. Perhaps Sarah had told her what happened, or perhaps Mom sensed that whatever had broken between us was beyond her ability to fix. I threw myself into work with single-minded focus. When Colonel Peterson offered me additional responsibilities, I accepted immediately. When opportunities arose for advanced training, I volunteered. When other soldiers needed mentoring or support, I made myself available in ways I'd never been able to when Sarah's crises demanded my attention. It should have felt liberating. For the first time in my adult life, my energy belonged entirely to me. No sister's problems to solve, no emotional emergencies to manage, no one else's needs taking priority over my own development. Instead, it felt like learning to walk with a phantom limb. The habit of caring for Sarah had been so fundamental to my identity that its absence left me disoriented, unsure how to fill the space where her needs used to live. 6 months after the funeral I didn't attend, I received a commendation for excellence in leadership development. The ceremony was small, routine, the kind of recognition that happens regularly in military life. But as I stood at attention while Colonel Peterson read the citation, I found myself thinking about Sarah. She would have been proud once. Would have called to congratulate me, maybe even attended the ceremony if she could. The sister I'd protected and supported through childhood would have celebrated this achievement as enthusiastically as if it were her own. But that sister was gone, replaced first by someone who laughed at her husband's insults, and then by someone who blamed me for his death. The person who might have shared this moment with me no longer existed, perhaps had never existed outside my own protective instincts. A year after Marcus's death, I ran into Jennifer at a military conference. She was working as a civilian contractor now, successful and content with her post-service life. Over dinner, she asked about Sarah. "We don't speak anymore," I said simply. Jennifer studied my face. Because of what happened with her husband? I'd never told her about my role in Marcus's deployment, but Jennifer was perceptive. She'd probably pieced together enough context to understand the general outline of events. Because of a lot of things. His death was just the final break. Do you regret it? The question I'd been avoiding for 13 months. Did I regret helping Marcus get the deployment that killed him? Did I regret the 20 years of devotion that had led to that anniversary dinner? Did I regret the decision to stop cushioning Sarah's life with my automatic support? I regret that he died, I said carefully. But I don't regret helping him get what he wanted. And Sarah? Sarah made her choice about who mattered to her. She chose someone who thought insulting me was entertainment, and she laughed along. I can't regret her living with the consequences of that choice. Jennifer nodded slowly. It's funny how people can take your love for granted until it's gone. Then suddenly they realize what they lost. But that implied Sarah had realized something, had experienced some recognition of what she'd thrown away. I had no evidence that was true. For all I knew, she'd convinced herself that I was entirely to blame, that Marcus's death was the act of a vindictive sister rather than the consequence of his own ambitions and her own choices. Maybe that was better for her. Maybe living with the belief that she'd been wronged was easier than accepting that she'd contributed to her own loss. 2 years after Marcus's death, I was promoted to Sergeant First Class. It was a significant advancement, recognition of leadership abilities that had been tested and proven over 15 years of service. The promotion ceremony was larger this time, attended by unit members who'd worked under my supervision and colleagues who'd watched my career develop. Mom called that night to congratulate me. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Your father would have been too." "Thank you." Sarah doesn't know about the promotion. She doesn't ask about you anymore. There it was, the confirmation I'd suspected but not wanted to hear. Sarah had moved on completely, cut me out of her thoughts as thoroughly as she'd cut me out of her life. I was no longer even a source of anger or resentment, just nothing. That's probably best for both of us. Is it? You were so close once. I keep thinking there must be some way to fix things between you. Some things can't be fixed, Mom. Some things break too completely. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters and thought about the sister I'd once had. Not the Sarah who'd laughed at Marcus's insults or blamed me for his death, but the little girl who'd looked at me like I could solve any problem. The teenager who'd called me her hero. The college student who'd credited me with making her dreams possible. That person had been real once. But she'd also been temporary, a phase Sarah had passed through on her way to becoming someone else. Someone who could discard 20 years of devotion for the approval of a man who'd been in her life less than 2 years. I'd spent so long protecting someone who was always going to outgrow me. The tragedy wasn't that I'd stopped, it was that I'd never recognized the relationship for what it really was. Not sisterhood, but caretaking. Not mutual love, but convenient dependency. Marcus's death had simply revealed what was already true. Sarah had never valued me the way I'd valued her. The proof was in how easily she'd been able to cut me out completely, how thoroughly she'd been able to move on. 3 years after his death, I heard through family that Sarah had started dating again. Someone from her new hometown, a civilian with no connection to military life. Mom mentioned it casually, probably testing whether the news would provoke any reaction from me. It didn't. Sarah deserving happiness after her loss, finding someone who appreciated her, building a new life, none of that bothered me. If anything, it confirmed that she was resilient, capable of healing and moving forward. She'd be fine without me, just as she'd always been fine when I wasn't actively solving her problems. That realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something I'd started to understand. The person I'd thought I was protecting all those years had never needed protection. She'd needed support, funding, convenience, someone to clean up her messes, but not protection. She'd always been strong enough to stand on her own. I'd just never let her prove it. 5 years after Marcus's funeral, I was selected for promotion to Master Sergeant. The ceremony was held on a crisp October morning, with full unit attendance and family members invited to witness the advancement. Mom flew in for the event, proud and emotional as she watched me receive the new rank. During the reception afterward, she pulled me aside. "Sarah got married last weekend," she said quietly. "Small ceremony, just family and close friends." I felt nothing. Not hurt, not anger, not even curiosity about what Sarah's new husband was like or whether she was happy. The information registered as just another fact about someone who'd once been important to me. I'm glad she found someone. Are you? Really? Really. Sarah deserves to be happy. Mom studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of the sister who'd once dropped everything to solve Sarah's problems. "You've changed so much these past few years. Sometimes I barely recognize you." People grow up. Even sisters. Is that what this is? Growing up. I thought about that question as the reception continued around us. Military families celebrating advancement, colleagues sharing stories, junior soldiers looking to senior leadership for guidance. This was my world now, built on merit and mutual respect rather than obligation and one-way devotion. "Maybe it's learning the difference between love and enabling," I said finally. I spent 20 years teaching Sarah that she didn't have to be responsible for her own life because I'd always be there to fix things. That wasn't love. That was just habit. And now? Now she's learned to be responsible for herself. She's married someone who appreciates her, built a life that makes her happy, moved on from tragedy. She's exactly who she was always capable of being. Without you. Without me. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue. Young soldiers laughed with their families, proud of their service and optimistic about their futures. It was a good life, I realized. Not the life I'd planned when I was 25 and thought my primary purpose was taking care of Sarah, but a meaningful one. 7 years after Marcus's death, I received orders for a new assignment, senior leadership position at a training facility, responsible for developing the next generation of NCOs. It was prestigious work, the kind of role that recognized both technical competence and leadership ability. Colonel Peterson, now a general, called to congratulate me. "You've built something remarkable with your career," she said. "The soldiers you've mentored speak of you with real respect." "That's not common." "Thank you, ma'am. I remember when you first started working with junior personnel. You had this intensity about it, like you were trying to save everyone who walked through the door." She was right. In those early years after cutting contact with Sarah, I'd thrown myself into mentoring with almost desperate energy. Every young soldier with problems became a project, someone whose success could somehow justify my own choices. "You're more balanced now," General Peterson continued. "Still dedicated, but not desperate. It's made you more effective." After we hung up, I sat in my office and thought about that word, desperate. It described perfectly how I'd approached relationships for most of my life. Desperate to be needed, desperate to prove my worth through service, desperate to maintain connections even when they'd become toxic. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "This is Master Sergeant Hastings." Silence on the other end, then a familiar voice I hadn't heard in 7 years. "It's Sarah." My hand tightened on the phone, but my voice remained steady. "Hello, Sarah. I heard about your promotion. Mom mentioned it." "Thank you." Another long pause. "I also heard about your new assignment. The leadership position. It sounds important. It's good work. I'm sure you'll be excellent at it. You always were good at helping people." The conversation felt surreal, like speaking with a ghost of someone I'd once known. Sarah's voice was different, older, more careful, lacking the easy assumption of welcome she'd once carried. "Was there something you needed?" I asked, not unkindly but without warmth. "I wanted to. I've been thinking about calling for months. Years, actually. I just never knew what to say." "And now you do?" "No. I still don't know what to say. But I'm getting married again next month, and it made me think about family. About the people who shaped who I am." I waited, giving her space to continue or hang up as she chose. "I blamed you for Marcus's death. I know you know that. But I've been in therapy, and I've started to understand that blame isn't the same as truth." "What's the truth, Sarah?" "The truth is that Marcus chose to deploy. He wanted combat experience, wanted to prove himself. You might have helped him get the assignment, but he made the choice to pursue it. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from her, but also less than complete accountability. She was acknowledging Marcus's role without fully examining her own. And the truth is that I was a terrible sister to you for years before he died. I took your support for granted, let him disrespect you, treated you like an embarrassment instead of the person who'd made my success possible." There it was. The recognition I'd once thought I wanted to hear. "I'm sorry," she continued when I didn't respond. "I'm sorry I laughed when he called you a deadbeat. I'm sorry I chose his approval over your dignity. I'm sorry I blamed you for consequences you didn't intend." The apology was comprehensive, thoughtful, probably rehearsed. It acknowledged her failures and my pain without completely absolving herself or completely condemning me. It was exactly the kind of thing someone might construct in therapy sessions over several years. It also came 7 years too late. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "Do you forgive me?" The question hung between us, loaded with years of history and hurt and choices that couldn't be undone. Did I forgive her? Forgiveness implied anger that needed releasing, pain that needed healing. But I felt neither angry nor pained anymore. I felt nothing at all. "I hope you have a wonderful wedding," I said. "I hope your new husband makes you happy." That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. We sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that this conversation was ending something rather than beginning it. "Will I ever see you again?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't think so." "Because you can't forgive me, or because you don't want to?" I thought about that distinction. The inability to forgive suggested ongoing struggle, continued emotional investment in what had happened between us. The choice not to want forgiveness suggested something different, complete disconnection, the absence of feeling rather than the presence of anger. Because we became strangers a long time ago, and strangers don't owe each other anything. Sarah was quiet for so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, I understand. Take care of yourself, Sarah. You too. I hung up and returned to reviewing personnel files for my new assignment. Somewhere across the country, my sister was planning her second wedding. In a few weeks, she'd promised to love and honor someone who'd probably never heard my name. That was fine. Some chapters ended not with dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but with quiet acknowledgement that the story was over. Some relationships weren't meant to survive the people they'd helped create. I'd spent 30 years learning to be the kind of person who protected others. Now I was learning to be the kind of person who protected herself. It was a different kind of strength, but it was strength nonetheless. My sister Sarah was 3 years younger, which meant I spent most of our childhood being her shield. When kids at school called her weird for reading during recess, I'd step between them and her book. When she forgot her lunch money, I'd split mine. When she cried because mom worked late again, I'd make grilled cheese and sit with her until she fell asleep on the couch. It wasn't a burden then. Sarah had this way of looking at me like I could fix anything, and maybe I believed it too. When she struggled in math, I tutored her every night for a month until she passed. When she wanted to try out for drama club but was too scared, I walked her to auditions and waited outside the door. When she got caught sneaking out in high school, I covered for her, took the punishment, let mom think I was the one breaking rules. The pattern established itself early. Sarah needed, I provided. She dreamed, I made it possible. When she decided she wanted to go to college but had no money saved and mediocre grades, I worked double shifts at the diner and helped her apply for scholarships. I proofread every essay, drove her to every interview, celebrated when she got into state like it was my own acceptance letter. College changed her, or maybe it just revealed what was always there. The phone calls home became less frequent, then perfunctory. When she did call, it was to ask for money or complain about professors or roommates. Never to ask how I was doing, working 60 hours a week to help pay her tuition while she pledged a sorority and went to mixers. I didn't mind. Not then. Sarah was becoming the person I'd always known she could be: confident, social, ambitious. If my sacrifices made that possible, it felt worth it. When she graduated with honors and got a good job in marketing, I was proud. When she moved to a nice apartment and started dating seriously, I was happy for her. That's when I made my own big decision. At 25, working dead-end jobs and watching Sarah build the life I'd helped make possible, I realized I needed something for myself. The military had always interested me, the structure and purpose of it, but I'd never had the luxury of pursuing it. Now, with Sarah settled and independent, I finally could. Basic training was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most rewarding. For the first time in my life, my efforts were entirely my own. No one else's needs to consider, no one else's dreams to fund. Just me, pushing myself harder than I knew I could, earning respect through discipline and determination. Sarah was impressed initially. She'd brag to her friends about her sister the soldier, post pictures of me in uniform on social media with captions about being proud. But as the months turned into years, and my rank slowly climbed from private to specialist to sergeant, her interest waned. The calls became even less frequent. When we did talk, she'd ask perfunctory questions about my service, then quickly pivot to her own life, promotions at work, new apartments, vacation plans I couldn't afford to take. The dynamic hadn't really changed. She was still the center of her own universe, and I was still expected to orbit around it. When I made staff sergeant, she congratulated me with the same enthusiasm she might reserve for mentioning the weather. When I got selected for advanced leadership training, she forgot to call back after I left a message about it. When I received a commendation for excellence, she was too busy planning her engagement party to respond to my text. That's how I learned about Marcus, actually. Not through a phone call or a conversation, but through a Facebook post announcing their engagement. My sister, who I'd supported and protected and sacrificed for, had gotten engaged to someone I'd never met, never heard mentioned, never been introduced to. Marcus was Army too, she explained in a brief phone call a week later, after mutual friends had apparently told her it was weird I'd found out through social media. He was a captain, she said with obvious pride. Career military, decorated, respected. They'd met at a military appreciation event her company had sponsored. I should have been happy for her. Sarah deserved love, deserved someone who appreciated her. But something about the way she talked about him bothered me. Not just the pride in his rank, though that stung, considering her lukewarm reactions to my own achievements, but the way she seemed to be trying to impress me with his credentials. When I finally met Marcus at their engagement party, I understood why. He was everything I wasn't in her eyes. Officer to my enlisted rank, college-educated with a degree that mattered, confident in a way that commanded attention rather than earned it through effort. He was also handsome, charming, and completely uninterested in hearing about anyone else's service experience. Sarah glowed next to him, introducing him to everyone as Captain Marcus, emphasizing his rank and achievements while barely mentioning my presence. When someone asked about my own service, she'd wave it off with something like, "Oh, she's in 2, but Marcus has the real career." I watched her transform that night, becoming someone who measured worth by rank and recognition rather than character and commitment. The girl who used to think I could fix anything now seemed embarrassed by the idea that anyone might compare her enlisted sister to her officer fiancé. Still, I told myself it was just new relationship excitement. Sarah had always been prone to throwing herself completely into whatever seemed most important at the moment. Once the novelty wore off, she'd remember who had been there before Marcus, who would be there after if things went wrong. But as their wedding approached and I watched her plan a future that seemed to have less and less room for me in it, I began to wonder if the sister I'd protected and provided for all those years had ever really existed, or if I'd just been projecting what I wanted to see onto someone who was always destined to outgrow me. The wedding was beautiful, expensive, and felt like a goodbye I hadn't agreed to say. Sarah was radiant, Marcus was handsome, and I was seated at a table with distant cousins and family friends, watching my sister pledge her life to someone who had never bothered to learn mine beyond my rank and last name. But I smiled through it all, because that's what big sisters do. They smile and support and sacrifice, even when they're starting to realize the person they're doing it for has become a stranger. The first sign something had shifted came at Thanksgiving, 6 months after the wedding. Sarah and Marcus arrived late, loud with stories about their new base housing and his latest training exercises. They dominated dinner conversation, Marcus holding court with war stories while Sarah gazed at him adoringly. When Mom asked about my recent deployment to Germany, Marcus cut me off mid-sentence. "Training missions don't count," he said with a dismissive wave. "You want to talk about real deployment? Try Afghanistan. That's where they send people who actually matter." Sarah laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an attempt to smooth things over, but genuine amusement at her husband's casual dismissal of my service. That laugh cut deeper than his words. I finished my story anyway, quietly, to Mom's polite attention while Marcus checked his phone and Sarah refilled his wine. Later, when I mentioned getting selected for a leadership position, Sarah barely looked up from her conversation with our cousin about vacation plans. "It's great that you're staying busy," she said, the same tone she might use for someone's hobby. Christmas brought more of the same. Marcus held court with opinions about military strategy, base politics, officer privileges. Sarah echoed his views, even when they contradicted things she'd once supported. When I mentioned working with a unit that had lost someone in training, Marcus shook his head. "That's the difference between real military and what you enlisted people deal with," he said. "Officers prevent those kinds of accidents. We're trained for leadership." Sarah nodded along, as if she hadn't grown up watching me lead by example every day of her life. The pattern solidified over the following months. Family gatherings became performances where Marcus was the star and Sarah his devoted audience. My achievements got polite acknowledgement at best, while his promotions and assignments were celebrated like national holidays. Extended family began treating them as the military experts. Uncle Joe, who'd served in Vietnam, started directing his service questions to Marcus instead of me. Cousins who'd once asked my advice about their kids joining up now went straight to Sarah for Marcus's opinions. I watched Sarah rewrite our history in real time. The sister who'd once bragged about me became someone who barely mentioned my existence unless directly asked. The sacrifices I'd made for her education became family mythology about how she'd worked her way through college. The protection I'd provided became stories about how she'd always been independent and strong. At Easter, when our aunt mentioned how proud she'd always been of my military service, Sarah actually corrected her. "Marcus is the one with a real military career," she said. "He's up for major soon." That's like a big deal. I bit my tongue, smiled, congratulated Marcus on his pending promotion. But something hardened in my chest that day, watching my sister erase 20 years of devotion with casual dismissal. The worst part wasn't Marcus's arrogance. I'd dealt with plenty of officers who thought rank made them better people. It was Sarah's transformation into someone who measured love by social status. The girl who'd once thought I hung the moon now acted embarrassed to share my last name. Their friends became people who wouldn't look twice at an enlisted soldier. Their social circle revolved around officer parties and spouse clubs where my rank would make me invisible. Sarah started mentioning how different their world was, how much more sophisticated military officer life could be. When I made Sergeant First Class, Sarah's congratulations came via text message. When Marcus got his promotion to Major, she threw a party and invited half the base. I stopped expecting invitations to their social events. Stopped volunteering information about my work. Stopped pretending Sarah's new life had room for the sister who'd built the foundation it was standing on. But I still answered when she called, still sent birthday gifts, still played the role of supportive family member. Because despite everything, part of me hoped the Sarah I'd raised was still in there somewhere, just buried under layers of new priorities. That hope died completely at Marcus's promotion celebration. Surrounded by other officers and their spouses, Sarah introduced me to people as my sister who's also military, as if we were distant acquaintances who happened to share a profession. When someone asked about my rank, Marcus answered for me. "She's enlisted," he said with the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be cruel, but somehow was anyway. Different world entirely. Sarah nodded along, as if the world that had shaped me into someone strong enough to shape her was somehow lesser than the one she'd married into. I left early that night, driving home in uniform that suddenly felt like a costume. For the first time in my life, I wondered if all those years of protection and sacrifice had been wasted on someone who'd never really seen me as anything more than a convenient stepping stone. The invitation to their anniversary dinner arrived with a handwritten note from Sarah. "Please come. I want to celebrate with family." The exclamation points felt forced, but I accepted anyway. Maybe this would be different. Maybe away from their usual crowd, we could find our way back to something real. I should have known better. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place that required reservations and had cloth napkins. Sarah had chosen it, she explained, because Marcus deserved somewhere special for their first anniversary. I arrived on time, in my dress uniform, because Sarah had specifically requested it for photos. Marcus was already holding court with the waiter, explaining his recent assignment and dropping hints about his military importance. Sarah beamed at him like he was reciting poetry instead of bragging about paperwork. Dinner conversation followed the usual pattern. Marcus's work dominated discussion while Sarah provided enthusiastic commentary. My recent training exercise in North Carolina got 3 sentences before Marcus redirected to his upcoming war college attendance. My squad's commendation for readiness got a polite nod before Sarah launched into praise for Marcus's efficiency reports. I'd learned to expect this dynamic, but something about the anniversary setting made it sting more. This was supposed to be about celebrating their relationship, but it felt more like a performance where I was the designated audience. The real moment came during dessert. Sarah was telling a story about their weekend trip to DC, how Marcus had gotten them a private tour of the Pentagon through his connections. She was animated, glowing with reflected importance. "You should see how people treat him," she said, reaching over to squeeze Marcus's hand. "Everyone knows he's going places." It's so different from, she stopped herself, but we all knew where the sentence was heading. Marcus didn't stop himself. He'd had 3 glasses of wine and felt expansive. "It's just a different level of respect," he said, looking directly at me. "When you're an officer, people take you seriously. They know you matter." The words hung in the air for a moment. Sarah's face flushed, but not with embarrassment. With agreement. "I mean, you work hard too," Marcus continued, as if generosity itself. "But let's be realistic about impact. You're what, an E6? That's fine for what it is, but it's not exactly leadership material." Sarah nodded along. Actually nodded, as if her husband wasn't casually dismissing the career I'd built from nothing while she'd been spending money I'd earned to fund her dreams. "You're a deadbeat," Marcus said with a laugh that was supposed to soften the blow. "A military deadbeat. All those years in service, and what do you have to show for it? A sergeant's stripes and a government apartment." The restaurant noise seemed to fade. Other diners continued their conversations. Waiters moved between tables, but our corner felt suspended in silence except for Marcus's chuckling at his own wit. Sarah laughed too. Not the polite laugh of someone trying to diffuse tension, but genuine amusement. She thought her husband's assessment of my life was funny. 20 years of devotion, reduced to a punchline at their anniversary dinner. I smiled. Not because I was happy or trying to smooth things over, but because something clicked into place with perfect clarity. The sister I'd protected, supported, and sacrificed for had made her choice. She'd chosen to become someone who could sit at a dinner table and laugh while her husband called me a deadbeat. "That's an interesting perspective," I said quietly, still smiling. Marcus took my calm response as encouragement. "Don't get me wrong, the enlisted corps has its place. Someone has to take orders, right? But leadership? Vision? That's officer territory. That's why they pay us to think while you get paid to do." Sarah giggled, actually giggled, like he'd made a clever joke instead of delivering a calculated insult. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his wisdom. "You're probably right," I said. Different worlds entirely. The subject changed after that. Marcus launched into stories about his next assignment. Sarah hung on every word, and I sat quietly, eating tiramisu and watching 2 people I no longer recognized celebrate their perfect life together. When the check came, Marcus made a show of paying, waving off my attempt to contribute. "Officer's privilege," he said with another laugh that Sarah echoed. I thanked them for dinner, congratulated them again on their anniversary, and drove home in perfect silence. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of my car engine and the rhythm of my turn signal at red lights. At home, I sat on my couch in my dress uniform and thought about that laugh. Not Marcus's, I expected nothing better from him. But Sarah's. The sound of my sister finding humor in my humiliation. I'd spent my life believing that love meant protecting people, even when they couldn't protect themselves. Supporting people, even when they couldn't support you back. Sacrificing for people, even when they'd never think to sacrifice for you. But sitting there in my government apartment, wearing the uniform Sarah and her husband found so amusing, I realized I'd been wrong about something fundamental. Love wasn't supposed to be a one-way transaction. Respect wasn't something you earned by giving more than you received. I'd raised Sarah to believe she deserved everything I could give her, and she'd learned the lesson too well. She'd become someone who could take 20 years of devotion and laugh when her husband called it worthless. The phone rang once that night, Sarah calling to thank me for coming to dinner and to tell me how happy she was. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted the message without listening to it. Some truths were better learned in silence. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Sarah's laugh echoing in my head. Not just the sound of it, but the timing. She'd waited for Marcus to call me a deadbeat before she laughed, as if she'd been holding it back until he gave her permission. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and tried to make sense of what had happened. Not just the dinner, but the slow erosion of respect that had led to it. When had I become someone whose feelings didn't matter? When had my sister decided I was worth so little that public humiliation was acceptable entertainment? I kept replaying moments, looking for the turning point. Was it when she'd first started dating Marcus? When she'd gotten married? Or had it been gradual, so slow I hadn't noticed until it was complete? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Had such a great time last night. We should do it more often. No acknowledgement of what her husband had said. No apology for laughing along. Just cheerful assumption that everything was fine because she was happy. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Work that week provided a welcome distraction. My unit was preparing for a major training exercise, and there were 100 details demanding attention. Equipment checks, personnel assignments, coordination with other units. The kind of logistical complexity that Marcus probably thought was beneath officer concern, but which kept real operations running smoothly. My squad respected me. They followed orders not because they had to, but because they learned to trust my judgment. When Private Morrison had family problems affecting his performance, I'd worked with him to find solutions. When Sergeant Davis was struggling with new responsibilities, I'd mentored her through the transition. When the unit needed someone to volunteer for extra duty, they looked to me first. It wasn't glamorous leadership, the kind that got you mentioned in newspapers or promoted to general. But it was real. It mattered. It made a difference in people's lives. That Friday, Colonel Peterson stopped by during afternoon inspections. She'd been watching our unit's performance metrics and wanted to see our operation firsthand. For 2 hours, she observed our training, asked questions, reviewed our protocols. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "I'm impressed with your squad, Sergeant. They're disciplined, efficient, and clearly well-led. That doesn't happen by accident." The praise felt good, but also strange after Marcus's assessment of my career. Colonel Peterson was a full-bird colonel with 30 years of service. If anyone understood military value, it was her. Yet Marcus, with his major's oak leaves and war college aspirations, had dismissed my contributions as meaningless. "Thank you, ma'am. My people work hard." They do, but so do a lot of people. The difference is leadership. You should be proud of what you've built here. That night, I called my old friend Jennifer from basic training. She'd gotten out after her first enlistment to pursue civilian work, but we'd stayed in touch over the years. She was one of the few people who'd known Sarah before the transformation. "She laughed when he called you a deadbeat?" Jennifer's voice carried clear disbelief. "The same Sarah who used to brag about her military sister to anyone who'd listen?" People change. Not that much. Not that completely. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "You know what this sounds like? Someone who's embarrassed by where she came from and thinks distancing herself from you makes her look better." I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from someone else made it more real. Sarah wasn't just caught up in new love or trying to fit into officer-wife culture. She was actively rejecting the life that had shaped her and, by extension, rejecting me. Maybe I should talk to her. Clear the air. About what? She made her position pretty clear. "The question is what you're going to do about it." What was I going to do about it? For my entire adult life, the answer would have been the same. Absorb the hurt, make excuses for Sarah, try harder to maintain the relationship. But something had shifted during that anniversary dinner. Some internal equation had finally balanced. I'd given Sarah everything I could give her. Time, money, support, protection, opportunities, love. She'd taken it all and decided it wasn't enough to earn basic respect. She'd chosen to become someone who could sit at a dinner table and laugh while her husband insulted the person who'd made her success possible. The old me would have found ways to blame myself. Maybe I'd been too focused on my own career lately. Maybe I hadn't tried hard enough to connect with Marcus. Maybe I was being too sensitive about their joking around. But I wasn't feeling like the old me anymore. I was feeling like someone who'd spent 20 years learning how to solve problems, and I was looking at a problem that had a very clear solution. The next week, I did something I'd never done before. I ignored Sarah's calls. 3 of them, spaced across several days, probably wondering why I hadn't responded to her text or called to chat like I usually did. Let her wonder. Let her experience what it felt like when someone you expected to be there suddenly wasn't. By the time she tried calling a 4th time, I'd made my decision. Not just about Sarah, but about what kind of person I was going to be going forward. The kind who demanded respect instead of hoping for it. The kind who drew boundaries instead of accepting whatever treatment people felt like giving. The kind who understood that some bridges were meant to be burned. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, during a routine briefing about personnel needs across different commands. Major Hastings from Human Resources was discussing upcoming deployments, training assignments, and the usual shuffle of people between posts. "We're still looking for volunteers for the Middle East rotation," she mentioned. "High operational tempo, but good for career advancement, especially for officers looking to check the combat leadership box." I sat in the back of the briefing room, taking notes like everyone else, but my mind had shifted into a different gear. Marcus was exactly the kind of officer who needed combat experience to advance. Young Major, ambitious, probably frustrated that his career had been mostly stateside assignments while his peers got deployed. After the briefing, I approached Major Hastings. We'd worked together on several training exercises, and she knew my reputation for getting things done efficiently. "Ma'am, I might know someone interested in that Middle East deployment." Major Marcus Thompson, currently assigned to logistics planning. He's been looking for operational experience. She pulled out her tablet, scrolling through files. "Thompson, yes, I see his record. Clean file, good efficiency reports. Is he actively seeking deployment?" "I believe so, ma'am. He's mentioned wanting more challenging assignments." It wasn't technically a lie. Marcus had spent their anniversary dinner talking about officers who distinguished themselves in combat, how real leadership was forged under fire, how his generation of officers needed to step up and serve where they were needed most. "I'll reach out to his command and see if he's available. Thanks for the recommendation, Sergeant." That was it. One conversation, maybe 3 minutes long. No strings pulled, no favors called in, no dramatic manipulation. Just passing along information about someone who'd expressed interest in exactly the kind of assignment being offered. I went home that night and made dinner, watched a movie, went to bed at my usual time. No guilt, no second thoughts, no wrestling with conscience. Marcus wanted to be the kind of officer who led from the front. Now he'd have that opportunity. 2 days later, Sarah called. This time I answered. "You'll never guess what happened," she said, voice tight with stress. "Marcus got orders. Deployment orders. To Afghanistan. That's what he wanted, isn't it? Combat experience. I mean, yes, but we weren't expecting it so soon. And it's a dangerous area, not one of those safe rear echelon assignments. He'll be leading convoys, working with local forces. Real combat." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing change. "He thinks someone recommended him specifically. His commander mentioned that personnel had received information about his interest in deployment." That makes sense. Good officers get noticed. "I'm scared," she admitted, and for a moment she sounded like the little sister I'd once protected. What if something happens to him? What if he doesn't come back? The old me would have offered comfort, reassurance, promises that everything would be fine. Would have maybe even suggested ways to get the orders changed or delayed. But the old me had died at that anniversary dinner. "Military spouses deal with deployment anxiety all the time," I said. "You'll learn to manage it." That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Sarah? That military service is dangerous? That deployments are hard on families? You married an officer. This comes with the territory. She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, "You sound different." Different how? Cold. Distant. Like you don't care. I thought about that anniversary dinner again. About Marcus calling me a deadbeat while Sarah laughed. About 20 years of one-way devotion that had earned me public humiliation. "Maybe I'm just tired," I said. We hung up soon after. Sarah promised to call when she had more details about Marcus's deployment timeline, but her voice carried uncertainty now, as if she was starting to realize something had changed between us without understanding what or why. Over the following weeks, I watched the deployment preparations unfold from a distance. Marcus would call occasionally with updates, his tone alternating between excitement about the assignment and anxiety about leaving Sarah alone. Sarah would call more frequently, seeking reassurance and support that I no longer felt inclined to provide. "He's worried about me," she said during one conversation. "About how I'll handle being a single military spouse. He keeps saying he wishes you lived closer so you could look out for me." The irony was almost amusing. Now that Marcus needed something from me, suddenly my proximity mattered. Suddenly my role as protective big sister was valuable again. "You're a grown woman, Sarah. You'll figure it out. But what if I need help? What if something happens and I need family? Then you'll handle it the same way everyone else does. One problem at a time. The deployment date arrived faster than anyone expected. Military schedules had a way of accelerating without warning, and suddenly Marcus had 2 weeks to get his affairs in order and report for pre-deployment training. Sarah called the night before he left, crying, "I can't do this. I'm not strong enough to be alone for a year." I listened to her sob into the phone, remembering all the times I'd comforted her through breakups, bad grades, job stress, social anxiety. All the times I'd dropped everything to be whatever she needed. "You'll be fine," I said simply. "How can you be so cold? He's going to war. I might never see him again." "Then you should appreciate the time you have left instead of spending it crying on the phone." I hung up before she could respond. Let Marcus comfort her on his last night home. Let him be the strong one for once. The next morning, I went to work as usual. Somewhere across the country, my brother-in-law was boarding a plane to go fight in a war zone he'd specifically requested. Somewhere else, my sister was learning what it felt like when the person you counted on wasn't there anymore. I felt nothing at all. That was my story. What about you? Have you ever been disrespected by family in front of others? Did you set boundaries, or did you let it slide? Drop your experience in the comments. I want to hear how you handled it. And if you want more true stories about standing up for yourself and reclaiming respect, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.